Hi, and welcome to Post-Burnout.com interviews. Post-Burnout.com is a culture website dedicated to venerating burnt-out artists the world over. My name is Aaron Kavanagh, and I'm the website's founder and editor-in-chief. This is our website's podcast where we interview people from various artistic disciplines. These episodes are sometimes full-length interviews from our site's articles and other times exclusives. If you're a returning listener, thanks for coming back. And if you're new here, thanks for checking us out. We hope you'll like it and stick around with us. Okay, so here's an interesting one for you. So back in 2002, this post-hardcore band from Kent, Ohio called Sweetheart formed, gain traction in the local scene, gain momentum, records an EP, self-titled EP in 2004. Then the following year they released their debut album, Art is Dead is Dead. Then they record a single, a 12-minute track, really moving, shifting, very interesting track called The Process of Making Us Well. And then go to LA and they record their second album, The Unbearable Tightness of Being. However, the band disbanded in 2006, and that single and that album, that second album, just never get released. So the band go about their separate ways, and then 20 years later they get a call, hey, do you want to release that music? So yeah, two of the former members of that band, Ahmed Gallab, who was the drummer, and Michael Howard, who was the vocalist and guitarist, join us to talk about what it was like to get that call and why they decided now was the right time to release their album. Enjoy. Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing I was just going to ask quite simply was like about the background of the band. I mean, my understanding is that Sweetheart was kind of, it was around from 2002, 2006, and in between that time you released two EPs, one in 2004, the self-titled, and then another in 2005. And from there, the band kind of broke up afterwards. I was wondering what have you kind of been doing in the meantime since then?
Um, I have a project called Sin Cane. I think I'm the only one who really does music still. So after we broke up, Mike and I were playing together still for just a pretty short time. We started like a indie pop band, for a short amount of time. Greg and Brian, we'd all pretty much finished college at that point, and Greg moved to Pittsburgh. Brian moved out to LA, and Brian has kind of gotten himself into post-production work for like films and TV shows and stuff like that. And Greg just pursued graphic design a bit more. And he also started working with me on Sin Cane when I started Sin Cane, which is my biggest kind of musical project. I started playing in a lot of like indie rock bands and Yesayer and Montreal and Caribou and like bands like that, and came back and started my own thing. And Greg wrote a lot of lyrics for me and kind of helped kind of co-produce a few of my first couple of records. Um, and yeah, I've just kind of been pursuing that pretty much full time, and everyone else has kind of just has been doing something else, just like
Yeah.
yeah, not really musical things, but sort of musical things.
Yeah, when the opportunity kind of came to go back to some of these recordings from almost 20 years ago now at this point, was it important to kind of get everyone on board, or how did that kind of work? How was everyone's kind of level of involvement with the new releases?
I think we all wished this album uh was released. The way everything ended in the band, I think all of us were just a little bummed out about. We were getting older, and people have their differences or whatever, and it 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 was what it was. We were 22 years old, and being in Sweetheart was a lot of fun, and it was like a pretty big catharsis for all of us. We were young and just needed to get our yayas out, and we did it really well. We had a really great time doing it, but it didn't last for too long, and we made something that we were incredibly proud of, a record that really embodied what we enjoyed about hardcore music and our influences and the music that we grew up listening to. And it just sadly didn't see the light of day. So when the opportunity arose to release it and Justin Nardi came back to us, it just couldn't have been a better situation for all of us. He's a really dear old friend of ours. Our bands used to tour a lot together. And of all of the groups I think we had met on tour, Bald Eagle, his band, was kind of like a brother band to us. We really, really hit it off. So it felt very nice and kind of like a resolve to everything to see it come out. And it was, I hadn't listened to the album in a long time. I don't think any of us had. We listened to it probably when it was done, and then just kind of let it collect dust for a while. And going back to it, it was just really nice to, revisit those fond memories of recording the record, of touring those songs. We played those songs so much before we finally recorded the album, and even the extended, like the process of making us well, like that, we recorded that twice, two different times, and the one that came out was this like was because we spent all day in this warehouse, all day and all night at this warehouse, just recording that song over and over and over again to get it to sound the way we wanted it to. And it really brought fond memories of us like
Yeah.
being in that warehouse and being in LA, kind of like going rogue, recording in this rehearsal complex where like Puddle of Mud was rehearsing next door, and like Body Count was rehearsing next door too. And it was really fun, and we were just so young and hedonistic and kind of, full of shit, just doing our thing. And now we're all like all married, and Mike has kids, and it's a very different, we're in a very different place. So it was really nice to come back to revisit all of that stuff.
Yeah, actually, that's really interesting that the process was kind of like recorded in, what was it recorded in like in kind of intervals, or was it try to get the full 12 minutes down in one go? How was that kind of like recording process go?
We were so hardcore back then. I mean, we would not record in intervals at all. It was
Yeah.
like, we're gonna do this entire thing in one take, and it's gonna take all night long. I mean, I remember that day we get to this warehouse in Columbus, and Mike had just gotten off of work, and he worked at a coffee shop. So he took like the two giant big like drip coffee things from work and brought them
Yeah.
to the studio, the makeshift studio that Brian made, and we just went at that song all night long. I think it was maybe like from 9 p.m. till 6 a.m. just recording the
Jesus.
same thing.
Yeah.
And it was so much fun. We had a bike and a skateboard in the warehouse, and we're just, taking breaks and doing that and drinking so much coffee. And then when we recorded the album in
Mhm.
LA, we also recorded a version of that song with the album sessions, and it was a bit more pro. We had like better microphones and Pro Tools and that kind of stuff. And granted, like by then we knew that song inside and out, and it was pretty easy to record it. But there was just something about that warehouse recording that we all kind of felt had this like, je ne sais quoi to it that we really enjoyed, you know.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting when you kind of like look back at kind of like stuff that at one point might have seemed kind of like arduous or I don't know, just kind of like tiring or something, and kind of like have like the fond memories of the recording process. It's a really interesting thing, I think, with like uh the kind of persistence of time. And I was wondering, like you were kind of mentioning, like, this was sort of the first time you guys were like listening back to those recordings since actually doing them around that time. I mean, do you find that that time kind of gave you a sense of detachment where you could kind of listen to things a bit more objectively, or how do you feel that kind of impacted you as a listener
Now or then?
now? So revisiting those old recordings.
Oh, that's a really good question. I think for me, I can speak for my I think I could speak for all of us here. I think we listen to it more objectively, obviously. I think we were just kind of we're very detached. I mean, at least I am. I'm very detached from the record, you know, versus when we were recording it. I was like, all of us were so into making sure it was what it was. Brian is an electrical engineer, and he was like the resident recording person in the band, and so he paid a lot of attention to like the technical and cerebral elements of how we made that record. And Mike and Greg on opposite ends. I wouldn't say, yeah, opposite ends of the same spectrum, kind of like the cerebral and creative, like connection to the music. And I remember Greg getting giant reams of paper and like mapping out the entire song, like for arrangements to every single song,
Mhm.
and Mike just spending so much time on his own with his parts and coming back into us and be like, okay, I got this thing, and how often we rehearsed and just played all of those things time and like over and over and again, repeating specific parts and wanting to make everything count, trimmed all the fat and nothing was like nothing was nothing was, it was ambiguous really in any of these recordings. It was all very well thought out, and we were really, really serious about that. And I think now, for me at least, I can listen to it more as a fan than like a member of the band. And I was going to Europe a week ago and was listening to it on Spotify and like texting everyone in the band, just being like, man, this is like this is like a musical. This music is
Yeah.
so interesting. It's like so far out. I can't believe we created something like this,
Yeah.
and again, like I said, it's fond memories of remembering like I remember Greg and I spending so much time on I think "Fuck Purgatory." Like there's like an element of that song that's just drums and bass, and Mike and Brian went upstairs to eat something, and the two of us just sat in, just being like, okay, we need to do this, and this is how the drum should respond to the bass, and so on and so forth. And now I listen to that song and I remember that time, and I'm like,
Yeah.
man, that was really fun,
Yeah. I think it's like, you really kind of like listen to it and you compare it to like the Artist Dead EP, and I think it's like it is just like such leaps and bounds just in terms of like the production, but also like in terms of like the length of the song. I mean, like obviously Artist Dead was kind of going for more kind of like 3 minute, where this is like more kind of like in the 6 to 8 minute range.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was that kind of like daunting to make more at the time. Was it kind of more daunting, I guess, to make more kind of expansive music like that? And obviously, I mean, like obviously the 12-minute track and stuff, which was releases
Yeah.
everything. I mean, it's just like an insane kind of like leap. And yeah, I mean, what was that kind of like process like at the time, I guess?
I think it was just very natural for us, honestly. When we started the band, I remember I had just moved to Columbus to start college, and Brian sent me an email, and he's like, "Whether you like it or not, um, whether you like it or not, I'm going to ask you to play music with me." And I was like, "Okay." I'd known
Yeah.
him. All of us are from the same. We were from the same town, and I'd known him as this like older, like uh mentor kind of musician who like was closer in age with all of the bands that we were into at the time from our town. We're Kent, Ohio, Donut Friends Records and Party Helicopters and Harry the Spy and like all those kind of post-hardcore bands that we were obsessed with. And he like knew them more and was closer to them, and had this very, very strong idea of like how we should start a band and it should be this way. Like he was like our leader. So
Yeah.
when he asked me to join, I was like, oh man, this is like a rite of passage for me. I'm really excited. And he had a bunch of ideas. Him and Mike had a bunch of ideas already, you know? So it was like, that record in particular, Art is Dead is Dead, was kind of us getting to know each other musically and learning how to play with each other and just kind of getting those yayas out. And like once that was like done, I feel like we just naturally, kind of became what the band had what was supposed to be.
Yeah.
That meant like longer songs. Like we really talked a lot about that. Like we wanted to have really linear kind of arrangements where things didn't really repeat and like the songs kind of took you on a journey. And I think naturally that kind of happens. Longer songs kind of happen when you're thinking about that kind of songwriting. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, it all just kind of felt like really, really, really like such a natural growth that you didn't really you didn't really feel like you were growing. It just kind of felt like, okay, well, this is the next thing that we're gonna do.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and it was just more than anything, just so much fun. Just coming into a rehearsal and someone being like, "I got this idea," or Brian and I spending time together and me singing. I didn't, Talking Tall was the first song I had ever written, and I remember singing him my part, being like, "Oh, I really like this thing I learned, listening to a lot of Unwound," and he was like, "Okay, well, let's work on it," and it just kind
Yeah.
of turned into what it did, and and it was fun, just super fun.
Yeah, it's kind of like this is a weird analogy, but it's kind of like puberty in a way. You just kind of like
Yeah,
grow and you don't really have a choice.
yeah, exactly, exactly. That's exactly right. But I mean, I think also it has a lot to say about like the four of us were really, really hard-headed, this strong personalities that had a lot to say,
Yeah.
in our own ways, and it kind of created this album that's just so dense and full of ideas and full of just color.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's interesting because like obviously you guys were like touring so extensively in those 4 years. I mean, like I think was it like in 2002 you guys played like something like 100 shows or something in the first year of like of kind of your formation. And like obviously I mean like when you play like those many shows, like you kind of like hone your craft just kind of like naturally. It doesn't become this kind of like arduous thing. And it seems like in a way to not have the album out, the Unbearable Tightness album, to not have it out, it kind of seemed like I don't know, kind of like history was incomplete in a way. When
Yeah.
just when Justin kind of came to you and said like, I want to release that. What was kind of difference uh in the initial kind of like back in 2005 of shelving the record versus now? What do you think the kind of change was in terms of okay, now's the time to kind of like get the stuff out? Was it just to have like a complete discography, complete I don't know, just was it a sense of completion, or how did it feel?
I mean, I think back then, I think the time heals all wounds, and like I said, it was kind of a, you know, it was it wasn't it's like all hardcore bands kind of burn out in some
Yeah.
way, shape, or form, be it like an acrimonious thing or just like people grow up and they just don't want to do it anymore and that kind of thing. And like I think um it was too fresh of like a breakup at the time where we didn't want to put anyone out, like we were young and able to tour, but we just didn't want to because the band broke up. And uh um another one of our friends who is really actually good friends with Justin was going to release the record at the time. And Paul from Perpetual Motion Machine in the West Coast was going to partner, or East Coast was going to partner with this guy. Um and we were just not really, like, we felt like it would be a disservice to the both of them to put in all this money, and we weren't going to like
Yeah.
tour or do anything. So yeah, that happened. And then 20 years later, when Justin approached us and he was like, I have this label. I don't expect you guys to play a show, but like I think just for myself and for the sake of like this being something cool, I'd love to put it out. And I think we were all just like, okay, that's
Yeah.
really, really nice of you and really noble, and we're in your debt for that. Like it's really, really great that you are doing this kind of thing to kind of preserve the history of hardcore music. Like people that there's a lot of hardcore records that just haven't been released that should be released. Um, and it just kind of felt right. It felt like right, and it was really great for the four of us now. Are talking more than we have talked probably at all in the last 20 years, which is nice. Like we all have relationships, but now the four of us together are, we have like uh, a text group and stuff like that. So yeah, now it just kind of felt right, felt right now after all of that.
Mike's just trying that.
Hey, hey, Mike, can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry.
There he is.
Hey, Mike.
How's it going, guys?
We
Good.
were just talking actually just before you joined, just about the kind of the burnout that a lot of like hardcore bands kind of get on the road. And obviously I think like I mean hardcore can people who've played in bands, sometimes they feel that there's kind of a limitation of what can be achieved. And obviously I think as I don't know if you guys find this too, but like as you grow older, sometimes I don't know, your kind of embers burn out a little bit, and the kind of rage that was once kind of fueling what you were doing, or the kind of I don't know, the kind of tenacity for that kind of like kind of extreme kind of like means of expression maintain, I guess. I don't know if you guys felt that, or do you find that, you're still just as like aggressive as you were back then? You're still just as kind of willing to kind of express your righteous indignation as you were back then.
I certainly don't have anywhere near the energy that I had back then. But I also don't have like nearly the testosterone that like needs to express itself like by yelling in a basement. So I don't think I could at all do the tour schedule that we were doing, but like at the time it was just so like I feel like there wasn't burnout for me with Sweetheart because we weren't expecting like to do much better than break even. So it sort of just felt like fun.
Yeah.
But probably with that kind of, there was a limitation of what we, like for me personally, what I probably should have been hoping it would go a little, probably shouldn't have been expecting so little. Because that maybe was a little self-fulfilling.
Yeah.
But we were talking about this before you joined, Mike, and I'd really like to get your perspective on it now. I mean, what was it like for you to kind of listen back to this record for the first time in like almost 20 years now at this point?
It was great. I was shocked. I mean, it sounds better than I remembered. And I mean, I'm like the scale of what our ambition was in terms of the songwriting is like pretty amazing. Like I'm definitely impressed by how much we were trying to do and how much of it like actually got done.
Yeah. And
I was telling him like that we were pretty relentless about getting everything down. Like between the four of us, we were so upset, like exactly, especially with Process. We were so obsessed with doing it all in one take and obsessed with how every single thing had to be thoughtful and meaningful. They trimmed all of the fat where like through conversation of like what the parts were, or like Greg mapping out all of the arrangements so we knew exactly what was going on the entire time. And when I go back and I listen to that, that's exactly what I hear. And I remember those conversations that we all had. I remember like, be it like you and Greg and Brian, or me and Brian, or Greg and you, or something, like all of us kind of coming together and all that kind of coalescing into like this very, very tight thing,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's like listening to it now, I feel like I had a passing thought of like, wow, if we had done this a different way, I might have like it's so spare in some of those stretches that I sort of felt like if we were doing it a different way, we might have thought to like make it more ornamented or do something a little less like repetitive. But that was like we really had a purpose, which was just to like let it. I mean, it's funny because I feel like we were really kind of big on there being no dogma to the point where it like turned into its own dogma.
Yeah.
That's true. Very true.
Actually, one thing that I think is really great, we're kind of like talking about this again, it's like how this kind of like this kind of re-release, I think the best thing to come from it is kind of like, as you were mentioning, the kind of like the sort of rekindling of the friendship from like 20 years ago. And everyone obviously now is in their own different space, everyone has their own things going on, but like I don't know, I still think it's like it I know I don't want to get too hokey about it, but kind of like the power of
we're down. We're pretty hokey. I mean, we are called Sweetheart.
Yeah, the kind of power of the music to kind of like or the power of like just that kind of collaboration at the time to kind of like still resonate 2 decades later, and still be something which kind of brings you together. I mean, how do you guys kind of feel about that? Like,
I mean, it's absolutely great to be back in touch. That's definitely the best part for me. But I also think like there was such a collaboration with this project that and that makes it so much more exciting. Like, yeah, at least for me, like I have always missed I have always missed like being involved in a project where it was 4 different songwriters and everyone like brought something. It's like it's organically alive in a way when it's that it isn't when one person is kind of dictating. And so that was like one of the real strengths of our process, and I think it's what makes the record kind of it made making it unpredictable, because there'd be like a song we'd been playing on tour for God knows how many weeks, and then Ahmed would be like, there should be a guitar part here, and like it's like one of the best parts in the whole song, like in the studio.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's honestly for me, it's it really kind of reminds me of a time and place where
Yeah.
where it was so, I mean, this is so corny to say, but like it was so much easier back then. We were so young and so focused on this project. So much of our time was spent talking about these songs, for 4 years,
and ad nauseum.
Seriously. Yeah, I played in
until
another band.
Until we were like totally boring at parties, like just in the corner.
Yeah. Like the parts became inside jokes for all of us. And it would be the 4 of us just like drunk yelling at each other at a party, being like, no, this needs to happen this way, or and it was pretty intense, like I think about it, and I think about like, all of the shows that we played all the time in Columbus, played all the time, and got to a point where we were playing all of the shows we wanted to play. I remember this one time Mike called me and he's like, we're going to open up for Envy. And I was like, what? Freaked out. Like I couldn't think about anything else for the rest of the week. And we're playing with Envy, and we're playing with Minus the Bear, and we're playing with this. And it was just like this fuel that just kind of allowed us to like want to rehearse more and like keep writing and make sure we got this song down and like understand, how we can make the set better. And like and then we knew that we had breaks from school, and we all knew that we were just going to go on tour during those breaks. And it was pretty intense. Like none of us think about that now. Like I play music for a living, and I don't think about like, all right, when am I going on tour again? Or like, I think about my band a lot, and it's a business, but like it's not nearly as like obsessive as when it was Sweetheart.
And that's the time and the place, right? It's only in your early 20s like that you have that like that little responsibility. Like you got to go to class, and like have enough money for ramen noodles when you're in the band. But like
pretty much
basically we didn't, I mean, I think we were just like having so much fun with it. It was the only way that it really like would have sustained as long as it did, because I mean we were just like laughing all the time.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, that was laughing, and I think a lot of the reason why.
And then like when we were laughing amongst each other, and then like when we were like out in public, we were just like obsessively talking about the band, and like probably
we hung out with each other a lot, which is something you learn as you grow up, that the people that you work with or the people that you're in this kind of relationship with, sometimes you just don't really hang out with them that often. But it was, we were definitely like a band of brothers, it was pretty
and
cool.
like it has its own downsides as well, because like everything's so like emotionally charged, and like it's all filtered through friendship. And like sometimes, I think it's not like, this isn't a new observation to say that like when you're especially when everybody's like a songwriter, it is kind of like dating like 3 other people. Because you just have to manage the relationship, and like and so and I don't think without like the friendship that wouldn't have really been possible.
You take the good with the bad.
Exactly. The rough with the smooch.
Perfect, guys. I think I've asked everything. I think the final thing I just want to ask is obviously now, like the the song, and they're already out at this point. Like the song and the album are already out. Reception seems to be like really, really good, really positive. Do you guys find it kind of flattering now looking back that the saying which hasn't been around for 20 years still kind of like persisted in people's mind? It was still something that people wanted to hear, people wanted out there. And now that the opportunity's out, it's people seem kind of like really into it, and it seems like because like when I was listening to the record, it does not seem like dated at all. Like this could totally been something that was just put out last week. It really feels like a contemporary record. So yeah, I mean, how do you guys kind of feel about the sort of the longevity of the project, I guess?
I mean, it's surprising. It's like really gratifying, and I mostly it's just all gravy. It's like we
Yeah.
never expected like
Yeah.
that it would come out. I mean, it's incredible what Justin's done. I like couldn't be more grateful to Expert Work and everybody who's been part of this project. Like it's just I it's hard for me to imagine like it getting this much of a response when it came out like at the time. I
Yeah.
almost feel like it's like doing better than it would have done. But I
I
mean,
agree.
it's maybe we just needed the world to catch up with us.
I'll say when we were like in our 20s doing this,
Yeah.
we always felt like, I mean, at least for me, we always felt like a little different than our contemporaries, like we were on Perpetual Motion Machine, and the bands that were touring at the time were, Circle Takes a Square and Baroness, and like, back when Baroness was like an underground band, and like, and the Catalyst, and like, Mass Movement of the Moth, like all these like East Coast bands,
The Blast
Malady,
Beats.
Page 99 and everything like that. And it just kind of felt like there was this like understanding and uh, language between all of those bands, and we were kind of not in the same boat, but we were friends with them and we toured with them, and we played a lot of shows with all those guys, and it was all great. But it always felt like people were a little confused by what we were doing, and so now for you to say something like, "Oh, it doesn't sound dated at all," and it like actually sounds pretty contemporary, or you understand it really, that's really, I think, flattering for all of us, and validating, a bit for all of us too. And I will say, it's really interesting because there's something in the air, like the Hated played a show last year, Seisha played a show last year, Orchid is touring this year, Harry the Spy regrouped, like all of the bands that we looked up to and loved. Like I remember Mike playing me the Hated for the first time, and Unwound got back together as well. Like all of these bands that we loved, that created the sound that like helped us influence create the sound that we created, are back together and are touring again, and that's really, really, really cool. Like that we're in that wave. I mean, it's a small speck of in that wave, but like still, it's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think there is like a huge kind of reprisal of hardcore. I think there's a huge kind of like interest in it still. And of course, there's like new bands cropping up all the time, kind of internationally. And I think actually the one thing I find very interesting is how kind of widespread it is. Like no matter whereabouts you are in the world, you can kind of find a basement and kids will turn up. Like whether you're in
Yeah.
like Argentina or Hong Kong or Finland or anywhere, it's just like people are going to show up if you if you put on a show. It's like it's really crazy how like it kind of how universal it is, I guess, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, and I think um me my journey, my personal journey of like continuing music and getting to like a certain place in the musical world, I find it to be really interesting how often I run into people who I can connect with through hardcore,
Yeah,
who understand the bands that I grew up listening to, and they grew up listening to Severin from City Slang, who releases my music, straight up like booked all of the Donut Friends bands in Germany, and that was one of the first conversations that the two of us had, where he was like, yeah, I work with this label Xmas Records, and I was like, Xmas, wow, that's interesting. You know, they put out the Party Helicopter. Yeah, I booked the Party Helicopter. Like, it was really interesting to connect with him on that. And I remember being at like a Nike event, some random bougie Nike event, and the rep that brought me there was a hardcore kid, and we were just geeking out about hardcore bands and stuff, you know. And I find that to be so cool, you know, that even after all of these years, this really small, seemingly small things, small little community in the grand scheme of things has been able to maintain itself, and we can still be connected.
I feel like at heart, there's like something to the kind of scene that we were a part of where it's like it was like people who wanted to just get up and go. There's like a lot of just like, let's do this. I mean, it's called, I mean, I feel like DIY really is a pretty awesome moniker that we all like put like wore on our sleeve pretty like obviously, but it in a way it's kind of makes sense that the people who like weren't waiting around like just for like let's be in our own band, let's make our own style of music, let's put out our own records, like are the people who are still doing stuff, you know. And it's like it has been a pretty awesome opportunity to like come across people who like just have the wildest projects and all the energy to like carry them out, like regardless of because it's like we were never like we're gonna like make this band like we're never taking Sweetheart on an arena tour, you know, like our goal was more just like let's have fun in a bunch of different rooms and like something about the atmosphere in a small room where like everyone, there isn't really any reason to be there unless you want to be, and like
sure, exactly.
Perfect. One final thing I'll just say is like actually you're kind of talking about that DIY kind of ethos, and what I think is really interesting is as well as like, you know, I'm seeing that now kind of like in the era of digital and self-publishing and self-marketing a lot. Like I see that kind of ethos kind of like really expanding to kind of all genres. It doesn't seem, you know, exclusive to punk or hardcore anymore. And I'd also say it was also a big thing in the initial days of hip hop before that went mainstream as well. But now it seems like everyone's kind of like, you know, from folk artists to, you know, heavy metal to whatever, like to every kind of genre, and every person their son seems to be kind of like adapting that DIY ethos. And I think it's actually a nice kind of counter to sort of the corporatism of the music industry now, again, which seems to be kind of going at a global scale. I mean, I think we're all kind of, I don't want to get too political about it, but we're all kind of like being sort of like absorbed by the same kind of global kind of industry that seems to just want to monetize money without actual consideration for the art. And I think this is a cool kind of remedy to that, or a cool alternative to that. I think like now there is the platforms to kind of get stuff distributed internationally, like in like, you know, a click of a finger. And I think it's like, it's really great to see.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very great to see.
Perfect. Thanks very much for your time, guys. I've really appreciated it. Is there anything you'd like to say before we wrap up, or?
Well, thanks for your time.
Thank you for your time, and we're all just very grateful for this to exist, you know, 20 years later, and we're sitting here doing an interview about this record that we you know, literally put our blood, sweat, and tears into, and just feels really,
and then basically
grateful.
Forgot about for like a decade or two, you know, so like it's pretty great.
Thank you so much, Aaron. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate your time too, guys. Thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Take it easy. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to that episode of Post-Burnout.com interviews. If you liked it, please subscribe and stick around, because we have plenty more like this coming soon.